All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're taking apart a literal masterclass in a content creation. We're deconstructing an advanced AI prompt that is specifically designed to churn out highly engaging, viral documentary content. What we are looking at is a fascinating blueprint. It's this incredibly comprehensive set of instructions built to generate scripts for a very specific genre. Real stories that sound like fiction. We're going to unpack exactly how this prompt engineers suspense, structures its narratives, and perfectly manipulates audio-visual cues to completely trap a viewer's attention from the very first second. It all kicks off with a mandatory 20 to 30 second cold open. The blueprint demands you start with this exact, dramatic hook to set a cinematic mood right out of the gate. And the source dictates that this opening has to be paired with rapid, intense visuals. Think an abandoned building at night, a mysterious suitcase, a clock suddenly stopping, or classified police files. It's designed to be an absolute sensory assault that establishes a deeply mysterious tone before you even have a split second to think about clicking away. The whole shebang basically boils down to one massive psychological goal. Every single element of this framework is engineered to take documented true-life events and structure them so perfectly that they feel like absolute fiction. The entire prompt revolves around this. If the audience isn't constantly sitting there wondering, wait, how can this actually be real? Then the content has failed. The stories must be factual, for sure, but the packaging, it has to feel like a premium Hollywood thriller. So how do they actually achieve this? Well, we are going to dissect the 5 core pillars of this playbook. First, we'll look at the unbelievable story archetypes. Then, the rules for gripping storytelling, followed by cinematic visuals and audio, tactics for viewer retention, and finally, the strict fact-checking mandate. Let's get right into it. Starting with number 1, unbelievable story archetypes, or categorizing the impossible. The blueprint insists on having 8 to 10 specific types of stories in the mix just to maintain variety, ensuring the audience never gets fatigued. I mean, you simply can't tell 10 survival stories in a row without losing your viewers, right?
What's wild here is that instead of just throwing out a random list of events, the prompt synthesizes the required stories into very specific archetypes. From impossible coincidences to unbelievable survivals, it is constantly shifting the flavor of the mystery. For example, it outlines the person who vanished, which requires a rigid visual timeline from when they were last seen to their eventual discovery, and then it quickly pivots to something like the stranger who changed a life, focusing heavily on emotional tension and chance meetings. This structured variety ensures the viewer never really gets comfortable. The unbelievable factor hits them from a totally different angle every single time.
Moving on to Pillar 2, rules for gripping storytelling, which is really all about engineering suspense. Because having a mind-blowing story isn't enough on its own. The framework outlines a super strict psychological playbook for how you actually have to tell it. You can absolutely ruin a great mystery if you give away the ending too early or if you fail to build up the stakes. And this is where the mandatory narrative arc comes in. You must ground the viewer in reality, introduce the anomaly, and then drip-feed those clues to keep them guessing. The source instructions are incredibly rigid here. Step 1, establish the normal situation first, so the contrast of the unexpected problem in Step 2 hits way harder. Then, you have to slowly dial up the tension and reveal clues one by one. You are expressly forbidden from giving away the ending early. To force that tension, the prompt specifically demands using very short, punchy sentences during suspenseful moments to force a dramatic pause. It reads exactly like this. He looked outside. Nothing. He checked again. Still nothing. Then he noticed something on the ground, a footprint. But there was one problem. There shouldn't have been anyone there. See what happens there? This meta tactic physically forces the pacing to slow down, making the audience hang on to every single word. By using these short sentences, the voiceover automatically creates dramatic pauses. It is literally a masterclass in script pacing. All right, on to number 3, cinematic visuals and audio, or the aesthetic of mystery. This pillar covers the entire atmosphere, making sure the packaging of these stories feels like a premium, high-budget investigative documentary. The visual and vocal directions are crystal clear. The explainer has to use photorealistic environments, period-accurate clothing, and an intelligent, calm, investigative voiceover. It vehemently avoids any cheap horror or fantasy tropes. The source specifically notes that the narrator must sound deep, intelligent, and emotionally controlled, like an investigative journalist, definitely not a ghost storyteller. If it looks or sounds like cheap fiction, the core premise of "this is a true story" completely falls apart.
And this sound design is just as calculated. It requires low drones and subtle pulses for the mysterious scenes, and soft piano for the emotional ones. But the absolute game-changer directive here is for major reveals. You have to deploy a gradual bass buildup, followed by a strategic moment of total silence right before a cinematic impact sound. That split second of dead silence, that's a psychological trigger that forces the viewer to lean in right before the final piece of the puzzle drops.
Which brings us to Pillar 4, Tactics for Viewer Retention, aka the 30-second rule. Even with incredible visuals and audio, viewer drop-off is the ultimate enemy. That's exactly why this blueprint includes a ruthless retention strategy. The unbreakable golden rule is this: every 30 to 60 seconds, the narrative must inject something new, a clue, a question, a twist, or a massive visual shift to completely reset the viewer's attention span. You literally cannot go a full minute without altering the trajectory of the scene. This constant injection of new variables flawlessly feeds the viewer's dopamine loop, keeping them in this perpetual state of discovery. To glue all these 30-second resets together, you use what are called curiosity gaps. These are specifically scripted transitions designed to tease that the mystery is only getting deeper. The prompt provides exact phrases to use, like, "What happened next was even harder to explain," or "Investigators had no idea what they were about to discover." These gaps act as the connective tissue, binding those retention blocks into one seamless, addictive narrative flow. The prompt even scripts a mid-video hook to forcefully grab viewers right at the halfway mark, reminding them that these crazy stories are actually sitting in official records. Right when a viewer might be checking their watch or grabbing their phone, the script directly addresses them, raises the stakes all over again, and anchors the craziness back to the central theme. This is documented reality.
Finally, we hit number 5, the strict fact-checking mandate, anchoring the impossible. This brings us to the most critical, ethical bedrock of this entire format: the truth.
The prompt dictates that reality is only stranger than fiction if it is relentlessly, undeniably fact-checked. It strictly bans fake internet rumors, demands verified sources like court documents, and explicitly outlaws those clickbaiting 99.999% impossible statistics you see everywhere online. The credibility is exactly what makes the suspense work. If a scientific explanation exists for a supposed miracle, the prompt mandates that you actually explain it. As things wrap up, the playbook concludes by suddenly slowing down the pacing to deliver this really profound thought. It cements the idea that the extraordinary events you just witnessed were not from someone's imagination, but actually happened. After a relentless, fast-paced retention loop, the prompt instructs the creator to just drop the tempo. It lets the viewer breathe. It summarizes the human experience, lost things returning, people surviving the impossible, and grounds it all in the heavy weight of history. And right at the very end, it instructs the creator to drop this exact provocative question: which story shocked you the most? It is the perfect tactic to summarize the journey and drive a ton of audience engagement right at the finish line. It invites the viewer to reflect on the highly structured emotional roller coaster they just experienced. Because this isn't just about telling a story, it's the data-driven science of commanding human attention. And now, I leave this question to you. Based on all the archetypes we just explored, which type of impossible story actually shocks you the most?